بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وفي الآخرين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا مسلمين مؤمنين موحدين. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His blessings upon us, and that He sent down the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a rahmah for the people, for all people, and more specifically so that we can have a better understanding of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in the path that He has laid out for us as we strive in His cause. And so the topic for today is called Jannattitude, or Jannattitude, depending on the wording. And here it's implying a mindset or a mentality or a process in the heart and in the mind that takes into account Jannah in all situations of life. So part of this, is our consciousness, and how our heart and our mind function to remind us throughout our daily life of Jannah. And of course, Islam is greater than heaven and hell or reward, right? That the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our master and we are His servants, and that we would serve Him irrelevant to what He gives us, irrelevant to what reward He would give us, simply the understanding of servitude that we're going to serve Him regardless. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created heaven and hell as a system of motivation, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, that we're closer to you than your jugular vein. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us inside and out. He knows what gets us moving and gets us motivated. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the people who respect what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, or the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid out for us, the people who respect this path are the people who have the most knowledge. So the more knowledge we have, the more connections we can make in our life that will cause us to take a path better than the one we're on consistently. And an example of this is, for instance, the hand, right? When we look at our hand, all of us see the physical reality that is the hand. We look at our hand and say, okay, this is my hand. These are my fingers. These are joints. There's joints. We understand this. This is the physical reality of the hand. But what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to see in our hand is He wants us to see that He is the creator of the hand, and that we should remember Him for creating this hand, right? And then we can remember all of the things that go into the making of it, and all of the things that it does for us. Like Sir Isaac Newton saying that his greatest sign of God that he has seen from all of the science that he has studied and all of his knowledge is the thumb. Whenever he used to look at his thumb, he used to remember God, because he saw and he said how amazing, right? He knew all the science behind the thumb, and he understood that there are so many things that we wouldn't be able to do without it, and that to him was a sign of it. So we see here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to take us from the physical realities that we experience in our mind and in our heart, and He wants to move us to a greater consciousness. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He describes who are the Muslims, right? Who are the mu'mineen? Who are the believers and the people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He says one of the characteristics of these people is yu'minuna bil ghayb, that they believe in the unseen, right? But not only do they believe in it, they interact with the unseen intellectually. Like they interact with the unseen in their heart and in their mind, and that they do that through the key to the unseen, which is Al-Quran and the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for instance, the Quran tells us certain things. It tells us about heaven, it tells us about hell, it tells us about angels, it tells us about shaitan, it tells us about things that we can't see. And then we go to the Sunnah, right, and we have many narrations from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam about things that are occurring in the unseen that we don't see. So we see here that the purpose, one of the purposes of the Quran and of the Sunnah is to increase our consciousness of the unseen and to allow us to raise ourselves to interact in the unseen. For instance, that we understand that when I say, for instance, La ilaha illallah, when I say La ilaha illallah, there's no God but God, I understand through the Quran and through the Sunnah that when I say La ilaha illallah, there may be swarming around me thousands or even millions of angels, right? And then I feel that, right? And so there's this kind of inherent peace that comes along with this, so that when we, for instance, make dhikr, or even majlis, like this one, like a circle of knowledge, right? There's a specific hadith from Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam that talks about how the angels come around the circle of knowledge and come down, right? And there's this kind of tranquility in this knowledge. See, so that if we didn't have this knowledge, we would not be aware of what's occurring in the unseen, and that there's a difference, and we wouldn't be conscious of it. So that is the first thing that when we talk about Jannattitude, it is the mindset of being aware of Jannah throughout our daily lives, for instance. And I've given multiple khutbah and lectures on this. For instance, the khutbah on patience that I gave weeks ago, one of the things was that one of the motivations of patience, or one of the ways that we can be patient, is that when hardship occurs, we can remember ourselves in Jannah. And that can give us, right, peaceful. That can give us peace in that moment to be patient. But furthermore, let's get into something else. And we can talk about, for instance, the moment when we enter Jannah. And let's talk about it a little bit, according to the books of tafsir, how this occurs. And what this will do is it will give us an endpoint, right? It will give us a moment of kind of reminiscing upon what's to come, that we can start to think about what's to come, and that will bring us a tranquility. And so let's think. So the believers will be standing, and the gates of Jannah are wide. They're huge, they're beautiful, they're amazing. And at the gate, there's this ring. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what this ring looks like, of course. And standing at the gate will be our Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And all of these people have just went through Yawm al-Qiyamah. They have just all experienced Yawm al-Qiyamah. What's decided has been decided. But now we're at the gates of Jannah. And so the guardian from inside the door will say, who is at the door? And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam will say, Ana Muhammad. Will say, I'm Muhammad. Right? And the guardian will then say that I have been commanded to open this door only for Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then the door will open. Right? And then all of these people will be rushing in. Everyone wants to rush in. And according to the books of tafsir, they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inspire within the heart knowledge of where everything that is yours is. So He will inspire to you where your house is. I shouldn't say house, where your palace is, or where your mansion is. Right? Where it is, where your spouse is, where your family is. He'll inspire to you everything. And you'll have with you your kitab, your book of records, of everything that you did in your life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, He says, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِمْ مِنْ غِلٍّ إِخْوَانٍ عَلَى سُرُرٍ مُتَقَابِلِينَ. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that everyone will have their book. And they'll all be talking, hey, look what I did, look what I did. You know, they'll all be talking about what they accomplished in the dunya. Hey, look what I did, look what you did. They're holding it, they're talking about it, discussing. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَزَعْنَا مَا فِي صُدُورِهِمْ مِنْ غِلٍّ إِخْوَانٍ, that we've taken out of their heart any jealousy, any sadness, any bad feelings. We've taken it out of them. And so people will be sharing other things. No one's going to be jealous of anyone. No one's going to be unhappy. No one's going to be unsatisfied with what they have. And so this is kind of beautiful as we start to reflect. And one of the things that we can reflect upon is that oftentimes, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Quran, He talks about people and something they do, and He says, يَقْطَعُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَن يُوصَلَ, that people may cut off what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has meant to be placed, or has meant to be received. And so sometimes what happens to us is that we can misplace what is meant for Jannah and try to achieve it in this life, and we can displace what is meant for this dunya and start to treat it like Jannah. We misplace what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, where and when it should be received. And if we look into the Quran, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does He tell us about this life? When He manages our expectations of this life, what does He say? He says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرِ. Allah, when He's managing our expectations of life, what does He say? You know, and you'll be tested with fear and hunger, and you'll lose wealth, and you'll lose family and loved ones, and you'll lose of the fruits of your hard work. And to be patient. So that's one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He manages our expectations. Now on the other side, when He manages our expectations of heaven, He says, لَهُمْ فِيهَا مَا يَشَاءُونَ. Right? Whatever you want, whatever you desire, whatever you can have, fulfill your desires, take it all, whatever you need, I'll give it to you. And another thing is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us of Jannah and of the Akhirah in general. He says, تَتَقَلَّبُ فِيهِ الْقُلُوبُ وَالْأَبْصَارُ, that the hearts and the eyes are completely transformed. That they're completely transformed. So what you see with your eyes now, in the way that your eye functions, in the way that your heart functions, in Jannah, your eyes and your heart will not function in the same way. It will be completely different. And that's why there's the ayah that says, if only the human knew what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prepared for them in Jannah. Right? And when we hear verses of Jannah in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us in relativity. Right? Rivers of wine, rivers of honey, rivers of milk. He only talks about things that we can somewhat grasp, that we can somewhat understand. Maybe we've never seen a river of honey, but we can imagine what a river of honey looks like. But can we really imagine what it will look like in Jannah? No, we can't, but we can try. So see that here, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes to us Jannah, He speaks in relativity so that we can try to understand. The thing is that I wanted to talk about with Jannah is that a lot of times though, we make Jannah seem like Jannah is hard to reach and that Jahannam is easy. Sometimes we emphasize, and especially with others, when we're talking with other people or talking about other sects of Muslims or non-Muslims, we always have this kind of understanding of Jannah is hard to reach and only the best of the best are going to reach it and everyone else is going to hell. We have this kind of problem, but when we actually look at the Quran and we actually start to look at it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us لا يصلاها إلا الأشقى, that the people of hell are the worst of the worst. Right? No one is going to be in hell except for the worst of the worst. And when He talks about heaven, He says أعدت للذين آمنوا. Right? He says that Jannah is prepared for those who believe. للذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله, for the people who believed in Allah and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So here we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is opening the doors of Jannah to a very broad category of people. And then when He talks about heaven, hell, He's saying لا يصلها إلا الأشقى, the worst of the worst people. Those are the people of hell. So for us, one of our roles, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us we are Nadhir wa Bashir, right? That the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a Nadhir, right? He's a warner. And he's also Bashir. He's the bringer of good news and encouragement. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells وَبَشِّرِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَبَشِّرِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّالِحِينَ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always telling us to give the good news or give glad tidings or give encouragement, right? That when we communicate with one another, our goal is to not say, watch out, you're going to hell. Rather, our goal is to put in a good word, right? When we talk about heaven, we talk about it in a manner that is a manner of acceptance. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's doors are wide. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's heaven is spacious and wide and accepting. Because especially when we look at the way that sometimes some of us have a tendency to teach Islam to our children, we're very quick to say, don't do this because there's this punishment behind it. Don't do this, there's this punishment. Right? We're very quick. But we haven't really taught people how to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How the beauty of Jannah can manifest in our lives and bring us peace. And that the peace of what is to come can be our peace right now. And an example of this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Inna ma'al usri yusra. And then He repeats it, Inna ma'al usri yusra. That with hardship is ease. But most people, when they hear this verse, they think, Inna ba'd al-usri yusra. They think that after hardship is ease. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Inna ma'al usri yusra. That with hardship is ease. So how is there ease in hardship? And this is one of those ways that we talked about, is that with the hardship of the current moment is the ease of the next moment, the ease of Jannah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam communicated it to us, where he said, الدنيا سجن المؤمن الدنيا سجن المؤمن. So he's saying that وجنة الكافر. So that this life is the prison of the believer and the paradise of the disbeliever. However, when we look at our lives, do we truly feel that we're in prison? Do any of you feel like you're imprisoned? Does any of you guys feel like you're in prison? The Prophet ﷺ said that the prison, that this world is a prison for the believer. So are we? Sometimes, okay. Okay. So how would you guys interpret this hadith then? Does anyone want to take a shot at it? You want to take a shot at it? Because it's true, right? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said it, so that means it's true. So what is it here?
Yeah, of course. When you are in prison, your freedom is limited. Like you are commanded to eat just what Allah allows you to eat. You don't have a right to eat something else. That's what Allah mentioned. You don't have a right to drink what something means. Your freedom is limited. Plus, you have to limit your steps from doing something behind this.
Yeah.
And Allah knows best.
Yeah. So, one of the main reporters of this hadith is Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. So Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he came and migrated towards the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the last 2 years of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's life. And he had nothing to eat and nowhere to sleep, no shelter, nothing. But he came with nothing, and he followed the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ around day and night, just memorizing everything that came out of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's mouth. And in those 2 years, he became the second greatest narrator of ahadith. So in 2 years, he did so there were many Sahabi who spent more time with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but they didn't do what Abu Hurairah was able to do. And so Abu Hurairah was very poor, but years after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's death, years after this, Abu Hurairah actually became a very wealthy man. And when I say wealthy, he became one of the most wealthy men of his people. And so Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, there's one time where he's riding through the marketplace, and Abu Hurairah wore very nice clothes. He smelled nice. He had one of the nicest horses, right? So this man, he looks very well and clean and knowledgeable. He's a scholar of Islam, the second greatest Muhammad, right? He has all of these things, right? So one of the poor men from his village, they come, and the poor man is a disbeliever. He's not Muslim. He comes and he says, "You're the one who narrated this hadith right? That the prison, that the world is a prison for the believer, and heaven for the disbeliever. But he said, look at me, I'm living in a prison. I'm the one, I have no money, I have nothing, I'm having a terrible life. I'm the disbeliever, it should be my my Jannah. And look at, this is 15 minutes though.
No, Isha will be doing praying.
No, I'm just saying that's actually still is 15 minutes. That's like 15 minutes more. He's saying, look at me, I'm poor, I have nothing. And look at you, you have the world, Allah's given you everything. And so Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he smiles at the man and he says, compared to what I will have in Jannah, this is a prison for me. And compared to what the disbeliever will have in hell, they're in paradise. So he puts it in perspective of comparing to the akhirah. So it's saying that compared to the akhirah, the believer is in prison. So now we look at our lives. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with safety, shelter, family. Of course, there are many Muslims right now who need immense aid and relief, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them aid and relief, and to make us people who rush to help them as well. But the beauty here is that when we infuse Jannah into our lives, not only do we transform our mindset in terms of say patience, but one of the things that Jannah has, or rather I should say one of the things that Jannah does not have, that the dunya has, is that in Jannah there is no more ambition. There are no more people to help, right? There's no more accomplishments that you can try to improve your community or improve other situations or yours, or help your family or relatives, or take care of a spouse or your children. All of these ambitions, right, these greater ambitions, they're not present in Jannah. In Jannah, that's it, Uqba Dar. It's the end. It's the final. There's nothing going on other than simply peace, eternal bliss, happiness. That's all there is. And so part of Jannattitude, part of having that mentality, is also understanding that this is the only moment that we have to accomplish amazing things. This is it. We have these days in the dunya, and then when we get to Jannah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of Jannah, when we get there, there's nothing left except the happy ending. So it's important here to understand that Jannattitude is not just simply about remembering how amazing Jannah is. It's also understanding that our ambitions end here. And it's funny because there's a specific hadith where these two Bedouin farmers, they come to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and they're not Muslim, and they ask the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and they're asking, like, we've heard all of these amazing things about Jannah, but we're not really interested. And they say, but can we, if we go to Jannah, can we farm? They want to farm in Jannah. The Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, yes, you can farm. You can you can farm in Jannah. So here we see that these two men, they didn't want all of the amazing things of Jannah, but they wanted to farm. They loved to farm. And so we see here that we're so attached to ease, and we're so attached to distraction, right? The generations, like my generation and the kids, the generation after me, we're a very distracted generation. Right? We always have to have something in our hands, or watching something, or doing something. We can't take any moments of solitude or alone time or thinking and reflection, contemplation. And so with this we find that part of Jannattitude is magnifying the moments to accomplish amazing things with our lives. And we talked about how, you know, in Jannah everyone's going to be talking about their accomplishments. But one of the things I also find is that we're also at times distracted by our careers, right? And that's part of shaitan's role, right? And there's an ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how shaitan makes you fear poverty, right? He makes you always fear that you're going to be poor, that at some point you're not going to have anything to go around to take care of your family, you're not going to have it all. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, Inna Allah yabsuta rizqa liman yasha', right? And Allah is al-Raziq, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider, He will provide. So shaitan makes us fear poverty, which in itself distracts us from putting it all on the line, right? From risking anything to accomplish something greater, to have greater ambitions with our lives. And I also find that with certain stigmas, we're also hindered from having greater ambitions, such as stigmas against, you know, being from extremists to terrorists to Salafists or Wahhabism or all of these things, right? We don't want to be associated with those labels and those stigmas. And so when we even talk about, for instance, someone will say jihad, right? Oh no, he said jihad, right? So we're in fear of this concept of struggle, of struggling for greater ambitions, because we don't want to risk being labeled, right? And on the other side, when we talk about spirituality and tasawwuf, right, that we want to be in tune with the unseen, with the ghaib, right? We talked about yu'minuna bil ghaib. We want to be in tune with the ghaib, and then someone will come and tell you, hey, watch out, you don't want to be a Sufi. So we have here, right, all of these stigmas and all of these labels working against us. And then if you talk about Jannah, they'll tell you, oh, you have to put yourself back in the dunya. Where do you think you're going? Right? You have to plan, you have to do this, right? And then if you're too worried about planning and doing this, they'll tell you, well, you have to be more spiritual, right? So we can't be caught up in stigmas and labels and what people are saying or what people are doing, right? We have to learn how to be our own human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, كُلٌّ يَعْمَلُ عَلَى شَاكِلَتِهِ فَرَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ هُوَ أَهْدَى سَبِيلًا. Right? He said, tell everyone to do to the best of their abilities. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who is on the most guided path. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He based His religion on everyone doing to the best of their personal capability, and left the talk and the judgment and all of these things and the gossip for Him. And so here we find that we need to, as individuals, we need to explore ourselves and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in a way that's proactive, in a way that we intensely see what He's given us in a very critical manner. And then we need to decide what type of life we live or we seek to live, but also understand that at the end of the day, when it's our time, right, that we'll have no more time to accomplish whatever we'd like to accomplish. So now is the best time, right? And today or tomorrow, those are the best days, you know, and time has a way of deceiving us, that we'll have another day, another week, another, you know, let me accomplish this and then I'm going to accomplish this. Let's go for what we want to accomplish, whatever ambitions we have, let's do them now, right, in this present day, and then let's leave tomorrow to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. right? And of course, we have to plan. But when one thinks about Jannah, when we talked about Jannattitude, right? Keep this word in mind, right? Jannattitude. Because when we think about Jannah in this life, that is where heaven comes to earth. And we have all of these theologies that talk about how we want to bring heaven onto earth. No, we don't want to. Like there are certain sects of Judaism, Christianity that want to bring heaven to earth. No, we're not trying to bring heaven into earth. Rather, we're trying to bring heaven into our hearts. That's the key there. And even when we're in our grave, right, and we think about this moment, when we're in our grave, there are people whose grave will be like a piece of paradise. Right? When we talk about punishment of the grave, there are people who will be punished in their graves. And then there are people who their grave will be like a piece of paradise. And then there are people, everyone will be accounted for in Jannah. Everyone will be held to account. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Iqra kitabak." Right? But then there are people who will enter Jannah min dun hisab. Right? They'll go into Jannah and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not hold them account for anything. He will not. They'll just go straight in. Right? So what does this mean here? These people are people who held themselves to account in this life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to hold them account for the next life. So what we need to do is we need to make an account of ourselves, right? What we want to accomplish, what we need to accomplish, what we've done in the past. Right? Move on from that and look to accomplish greater ambitions and greater causes within our communities first, and of course our international communities, because after that we will have nothing left. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and give us more knowledge and allow us to hone in these ideas and these beautiful stories and narrations from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that we can bring Jannattitude to our hearts. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, allow us to be people who believe in your unseen, and not only believe but see it wherever they go and in whatever they do. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, allow us to be people who take advantage of their time. Ya Allah, we ask you that you give us guidance and knowledge, and only that which benefits us, and to protect us from that which is not beneficial. اللهم انفعنا بعلما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا ولسانا حافظا ذاكرا. Ya Allah, allow us to remember what you have taught us. Ya Allah, allow us to gain knowledge. Ya Allah, allow us to strive in a path of knowledge, for verily the path of knowledge is the path of your paradise. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, make us neighbors with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Jannat al-Firdaus. Ya Allah, allow us to drink from Al-Kawthar. Allow us to drink from the fountain of Al-Kawthar from the hands of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen, allow us to be of the people who are close to you in your Jannah. Ya Allah, make us people who have hearts of gold, rich hearts, who overcome the trials of distraction, of materialism, of individualism, and allow us to carve a path in your cause and in your love and in your light. Ya Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, forgive us for our shortcomings and allow us to live a better life than we lived in the past. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Okay, so I think now we can open it up for any questions. If anyone has any questions. Anyone have any questions? Maybe I should pose a question to all of you. Yeah. So here, let me pose a question to all of you. Would it be too personal to say how often we think of Jannah, or rather, when we think of Jannah, what do we think about? Does anyone want to answer that question? When you think about Jannah, what do you think about? Yes.
Think about
Good stuff. Good stuff.
like, good stuff.
Good stuff. Yeah, of course. Yeah. But anyone else? You know, one of the things that I really think about when I think about Jannah is like, subhanAllah, like I have so many relatives back in Lebanon, like my grandmother. I never met either of my grandparents, and I live far away from like a few of my sisters, and even my father just moved. And when I think about Jannah, I have a tendency to think like, imagine living with like all of your like family and actually not having to leave. Like there's no business to call you to leave you from your family or any of these things. You actually get to, you know, like I've never met my grandparents. I could meet my grandparents. Or, you know, obviously when we think about people in history, of course, like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and all the Sahabi, and, right, all of these people, but of course from the Quran, what we take away is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says for the believers, لَهُمْ جَنَّةُ وَزِيَادَةٌ, right? So they have Jannah and Ziyada. And the scholar said, what is this Ziyada? Ziyada means extra. So they have paradise and extra. So what is the extra? The scholar said the extra is the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That you get to see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this rhetoric is all through the Quran, right? يَبْتَغُونَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. That the believers, they seek the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So also there is this extra, that eventually when you see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all make us people who see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when we see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we'll forget all of Jannah. We'll forget everything about Jannah. And it will no longer be of anything, any importance to us, simply because of the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His beauty and His light. One of the last things that I wanted to share with you is the passage from Surah Al-Insan, which talks about the degrees of the levels of the believers in Jannah. And it goes in this kind of process where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the believers when they're in Jannah, and He talks about the first people who will be given cups, and they will be next to rivers that we talked about, rivers of honey, rivers of wine, and they will be able to pour themselves a cup, and they can always do it. So in this situation, we can imagine, you know, like you, your family, your loved ones, all these people, right? And you're just next to this river, or anything, and you have whatever you want, and you can pour whatever you want, and that's obviously beautiful. That's amazing. You can't ask for anything more. And then it goes on to another people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, that they will have servants running around for them, getting them whatever they want. So then these people are kind of like, we could imagine like a more fancier party almost, where they have servants running around and serving them. And then the last people that's described in Surah Al-Insan is when we look at the Arabic grammar, it's emphasized that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be pouring the cup Himself for the last group. And I don't have the ayahs memorized, but I can. Yeah. So سَقَاهُمْ رَبُّهُمْ. So that the last one is implied that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pouring the cup Himself. So this is, see here, that not only is our ambition just to get to Jannah, right? That's not enough of an ambition. Although that when we think about hell, of course, then our ambition is just don't let me go to hell, right? So then you're willing to do whatever it takes to not go to hell. But even when we think about heaven, even then our ambition should be greater than just let me get in, right? We should have a greater ambition, and that is to be from al-muqarribin, all right? The people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who Allah himself will pour them a cup, and you can have an even more intimate relationship than we're capable of having in this life. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala once again to make us, of these people, and to protect us from the hellfire. And Jazakumullahu khairan. And once again, if you have any questions, which I took up your question time, so there's no more questions. Enjoy your dinner and remember each other in your dua, inshallah. And I remember the word Jannattitude. Jannattitude. I branded it myself. Jazakallah khairan.
I'll just add one thing. Jazakallah khair for this topic. The Prophet ﷺ has taught us to say something during the day or during the night, after Subh and after Maghrib, to ask Allah subhanahu Jannah 7 times.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
SubhanAllah with the yaqeen. If you don't do that, if we do that with the yaqeen, with certainty, to say after Subh and after Maghrib, Allahumma as'aluka al-Jannah 7 times. So Allah asks you paradise 7 times. If you die that day or that night, congratulations. Because it is Allah subhanahu who is guiding you to say that.
Right.
Otherwise, Allah will not allow you to say that. لا حركة ولا سكون إلا بإذن الله. So I'm asking the brothers and the sisters to ask all the time 7 times Allahumma as'aluka al-Jannah 7 times, and Allahumma ajirni al-nar 7 times. For Allah save me from the hell. May Allah subhanahu guide us and grant us the paradise.
Thank you for adding that. Jazakallah khair. Yeah, that's good. That is an amazing reminder as well. And mashallah, tabarakallah. Okay, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Enjoy your dinner.